What was it like to serve on Rome's Germanic frontier? For most people, this conjures up ideas of bloody battles fought in nightmarishly dark forests, haunted by bloodthirsty barbarians. Yet, while this might have been true in some fleeting instances, it is a gross caricature of the experience for most Roman troops. In reality, this involved manning a massive defense network during long stretches of peace and low-level conflict. Soldiers did indeed train for war and engage in battle. But they were far more likely to be partaking in more mundane tasks, such as patrolling roads, repairing equipment, stockpiling inventory, worshipping at temples, mixing with the locals, playing games, writing letters, and just being normal humans, as soldiers have done for millennia. Today, let us visit an ancient Roman fort to see what it was like to live on the Germanic frontier.
You can defend your own borders of the Roman Empire with today's sponsor, Age of Empires Mobile. Now, like many of you, Age of Empires has a special place in my heart, from its rockin' soundtrack to its gripping gameplay and its iconic art style, and of course for endowing me with a deep love of history. Following in the footsteps of this OG RTS comes a new immersive medieval war strategy game. Age of Empires Mobile blends classic elements with new gameplay and optimized controls. This means dropping you into a beautifully reproduced world with historical civilizations, architecture, troops, and leaders. It's all nicely delivered with the beautiful Age of Empires art style. Gameplay will see you build up your city while recruiting unique heroes to lead your armies. Commanders each have their own skills, which must be synergized or countered for strategic superiority. When it comes time for battle, these clashes will feature thousands of troops on screen. There's even an immersive 3D siege mode to dial up the intensity of combat. Age of Empires Mobile already launched on October 17th and has more than 5 million pre-registrations already. So get in on the action for yourself by clicking the link in the description, and be sure to use the code AOEMGL for an exclusive value pack and get special top offers on the official website. Enjoy! And finally, I also wanted to shout out the 2 reenactment groups that made this episode possible: Veteris Milites and Imperium Romanum. Imperium Romanum actually has their own YouTube channel, which I highly recommend you check out because they make their own fantastic documentaries and clearly have the passion and skill to pull it off to superb results. I'll link both in the description below.
The Germanic frontier had been forged in the early 1st century AD as a result of massive Roman campaigns against the tribes of the north. In such matters, the Rhine and Danube rivers proved to be convenient natural boundaries behind which the legions could rally to safeguard the interior provinces whilst standing ready to strike out beyond them. Thus it was that over the centuries, a vast military infrastructure project, known today as the Limes Germanicus, was developed to control this key region. But rather than manifesting as a continuous, impenetrable wall, this nearly 600-kilometer-long border is better described as a porous network meant to provide defense in depth. At the core of this system were the permanent legionary bases, whose grand castles acted as the operational and logistical hubs for the Roman military. Each controlled a roughly 50 to 100 kilometer wide sector at the front, yet alone, this task would be impossible. Thus it was that radiating out from these defensive hardpoints were webs of roads, walls, watchtowers, and forts meant to maximize the influence of each local army group. Given this fact, it quickly becomes evident that Roman and auxiliary units deployed to the area actually spent quite little time bottled up in their major fortresses. After all, such concentrations were only necessary for the waging of large campaigns in times of all-out war. But these instances were rare. Rather, in the times of peace or low-level conflict, which largely defined the era, the troops would far more commonly find themselves dispersed across the frontier. Thus, to truly understand what it was like to serve on the Germanic frontier, let us now take a closer look at life in these minor facilities. As we zoom into the Germanic Limes, we can first center ourselves around a theoretical legionary fortress. As previously mentioned, it acts as the hub of local defensive operations. Branching out from it will be roads which connect to smaller auxiliary fortresses and fortlets. These came in many shapes and sizes depending on the occupants. For instance, a cohort-sized unit of 500 infantry would require quite substantial barracks and armories, while a cavalry ala would require stables and grazing fields, and a naval force would require docks and shipyards. In our case, we shall assume a relatively small base in the manner of the Limes Fort Pole reconstruction in Germany. It measures some 60 by 45 meters with the layout of a miniature legionary base. The four sides feature an outer ditch with earthen embankments topped by wooden walls. An external tower grants heightened visibility and protection. Meanwhile, a small gatehouse allows for access to the interior. Within, one will find a central structure with barracks and storage rooms. Additional features include a well and a wood-cutting station. All in all, it is a rather humble facility. Here, we can imagine that a century-sized unit of about 100 men might be headquartered. Again, we should note that this fort only had a portion of its total strength present at any given time. About 30 to 50 men were suitable as a skeleton to secure the base, while the rest of their number might be further dispersed in watchtowers, out on patrols, or off on leave. With this in mind, let's see what daily life was like for the men on duty. Mornings would have begun by waking up in the barracks. Typical rooms housed about 8 soldiers. The accommodations were sparse, with most of the space being used up by beds that were either crammed together or stacked on top of one another. Personal items might be hung from the wall or stored under one's bed frame. Upon waking up, soldiers would dress and have a quick breakfast. By tradition, this was a light meal that would be prepared by individual troopers or their roommates. With little room to spare, such meals were had either sitting or standing, rather than being enjoyed in the more aristocratic manner of dining while reclined. Other small tasks often accompanied these first waking hours. This might include bringing in firewood or drawing up water from the well. Soon, the troops would go about their assigned duties. Among the most common tasks would have been taking up the watch. In the military world, night and day were each broken up into 4 equivalent parts. One would be considered lucky to be assigned a day shift. But the army would go through regular rotations to make sure that every person had his turn at night. Timings of such duties were kept by a water clock and judiciously maintained. Men found to be late to their shift or lacking in their level of alertness could be subject to reprimand. Apparently, to fall asleep on watch, especially whilst on campaign, was a severe offence which might even be met with execution. Soldiers assigned to the walls would therefore have kept themselves busy by patrolling the perimeter. In theory, this meant being ready to spot and repel assailants at all times. But zoning out or making small talk with friends was fairly common behavior. Those stationed above in the watchtowers, meanwhile, kept a sharp eye on the surroundings, looking for signs of the enemy or other activities worth reporting. Good practice would have been to regularly check in on the other Roman forts and towers which were within eyesight. After all, their position had been specifically chosen to relay visual messages between one another using fire and smoke signals. Should something noteworthy be detected, a watchman on the tower could quickly light their own beacon and sound the trumpets. And finally, those assigned watch duty at the gates would protect the fort's most critical point of entry. More often than not, though, they dealt with the mundane task of policing access in and out of the fort by military and civilian personnel. But watch shifts only lasted about 3 hours. The rest of one's day would be filled by other duties. These were often aimed at maintaining the readiness of the fort, its supplies, and its men. In terms of the fort upkeep, troops would be used as labor to carry out a variety of tasks, such as shoring up a weakening section of the earthen wall, repairing roofing that had been damaged in a storm, or regularly cleaning out the buildings and latrines. The grounds around the fort were also subject to upkeep. For instance, foliage which blocked one's line of sight might have to be cleared, while nearby trees would be felled for construction and firewood. In terms of equipment, it was each man's duty to see to the maintenance of their own arms and armor. However, much was also shared in common in the fort's armory. Here, the unit would keep spares, repair kits, ammunition, and more. Everything had to be properly counted and routinely inspected for rust or degradation. Specialty gear such as ballistae would also be subject to a unit's attention. While not often deployed for combat, when the moment came, this was not a piece of equipment one wished to have fail. Thus, engineers paid special attention to testing and maintaining such pieces. In a similar manner, troops could also find themselves working with the unit's quartermaster to make sure the supplies of food and drink were equally well maintained. And finally, the bodies of the troops themselves were expected to be maintained. This involved regular training and exercise routines meant to keep them fit and sharp. Larger forts actually had extensive training areas and even interior spaces for use in cold or inclement weather. There might even be a bathhouse for rejuvenation and relaxation. Beyond what we have described, there were likely even more duties to fill the hours of the day. Indeed, as is always the case with officers in the army, there will always be something that needs doing. Even if it means hand-painting every pebble in the yard again. But we should also point out that a unit's duties extended beyond the walls of the fort. Patrols, for instance, were regularly sent out to gather intelligence and project power into the surrounding regions. Other duties might include marching out to serve on rotation in one of the neighboring forts or watchtowers. Such assignments would have been good for the men as ways to stretch their legs and get some fresh air. It was also a critical part of keeping the defences of the frontier synced up with one another in an age before mechanized travel or telecommunications. Yet we should not imagine that Roman soldiers were inexhaustible. They were very much human, with a need for some off time. Just as today, much of this could be had by socializing with one's brothers in arms. Gaming was a regular feature of a soldier's life. This was often merged with a habit of gambling. Most officers turned a blind eye to such a vice, but in its extremes, a crackdown would be necessary. We can also expect soldiers to have taken time off for themselves, either relaxing in their bunks or visiting friends and family on leave. There would also be things to do in the local area. Inns to be frequented, spas to be patronized, and temples to be honored. But it wasn't just the soldiers who traveled to and from the fort. Merchants and tradesfolk also made regular stops at these locations. This is evidenced by ancient records which map regions according to the landmarks along its major routes in a manner similar to modern subway diagrams. As an example, they might look something like this. Once you take the northern road for 30 miles, you'll arrive at the post of the first Thracians, where you can fetch a good price for pepper. Then, if you go west along the road for 50 miles, you'll arrive at the posting for the Batavian Ala, who pay extra for high-quality beer. Over time, the presence of these permanent forts would be woven into the fabric of life in the region. The troops had needs, and they had coin. Thus, markets soon popped up in their vicinity to provide goods and services. From this exchange of commerce came broader social mixing. Officers, for instance, might soon find themselves acting as de facto judges in local quarrels, and soldiers might take local wives and start families in the area upon retirement. Over the generations, we see fascinating evidence of cultural and religious blending in these border regions, which might manifest through Creole languages and hybridized gods. Thus, I hope we have helped provide you with a more nuanced understanding of what life was actually like for soldiers on the Germanic frontier. In the rest of this series, we offer more highlights of Roman service with stories of manning a watchtower, writing letters home, and going on leave. You can catch episode previews and get HD downloads of all our art by joining us on Patreon and YouTube memberships. A big thanks to our current members for supporting the channel, and a shout out to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team and this community. If you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related videos. See you in the next one.